as the Marxists always like to say, the arc of history is bending our way. They like that stuff. They don't like it now.
Hey, this is Zoe with Bronze Serpent Media. I'm here with my buddies on All Over the Place, where the fun sanity never ends.
Hello and welcome back to All Over the Place. I'm your host, Eric Pervazic. As always, thanking you, All Over the Place audience around the world. Especially, we're looking at you, Switzerland, our new listeners there. And everybody, thank you so much for checking us out, liking, subscribing, sharing, all of that great stuff. Thank you. We can't do this without you, and we are very appreciative. Number one on that appreciative list would be Jim Culver. How are you, my man?
I'm great, and I'm very appreciative. How are you?
I'm fantastic because we've got with us a non-musician guest today, folks. Yeah, it's our shock face. Yes, indeed. We've got with us a guy I've been following for a while on the socials, in particular over at LinkedIn is where I first discovered our guest. And we've been bouncing ideas coming on the show for a while. And he's the author of Brutal Minds, The Secret World of Leftist Thought Reform in Our Universities. And in addition to Brutal Minds, hot on the presses earlier this month, DEI Exposed had the biggest con of the century, almost toppled higher education. Please welcome to the show, Stan Ridgley. Thanks for joining us.
I'll tell you what, thank you so much. I'm appreciative too. I want to let you guys know, my middle name's Appreciative. It's great to be on the show talking to a very erudite couple of guys and an erudite audience. It's always a pleasure.
It is certainly our pleasure on this. And, I mentioned the DEI Exposed, and then getting into the subtitle of it, how DEI almost toppled higher education. Tell our audience how it has not and how things might be getting better.
Well, I tell you, it could have been toppled if not for the election of our current president, who immediately took steps to ensure that DEI did not take over our campuses totally, basically infusing a noxious, toxic doctrine throughout every corner of the campuses. That's their words, every corner of the campuses, to empower a bureaucracy to modify and impede faculty hiring, faculty teaching, faculty coursework, to train our students and abuse our students in ways that, quite frankly, in some ways are illegal. And so I'm delighted with the changes in higher education that we're going to see here in the coming weeks. The changes ongoing right now as universities are pulling back from their commitment to this toxic doctrine that has really been plaguing higher education for the last 5 years.
It's one of those things I've just never understood, how affirmative action can be so readily accepted. Mm-hmm. It just demeans the whole process, demeans humanity, and you're going to a lesser or a lower common denominator. And one of the things that struck me within DEI Exposed was how DEI, which diversity, equity, and inclusion, on its face does seem like a very good and productive thing. And that's how it's sold to the masses. Yet exactly. Once you get on campuses, it's a much more sinister entity. So but please talk to us about how that dichotomy is reconciled and presented.
Well, there certainly is a dichotomy of how it's publicly presented, the front stage, and then there's the backstage of what actually happens. Now, we have to realize that the DEI is a con game. It's the biggest con of this century, in the sense that if you think about DEI and you ask the average person, what do they mean by that? Well, it's only ensuring a level playing field, ensuring that everyone gets a fair shot. It's teaching about race. It's teaching about slavery, when it's really none of those things. If those things happen, it's only as an unintended byproduct of the actual agenda. A DEI is a con game that consists of, and the con has a name. It's called virtuous victimhood, and it's grounded in the idea that America is a racist country, irredeemably racist, that is constructed on something called white supremacist culture. Okay, and this is what animates the entire enterprise of DEI. DEI grifters convinced colleges and universities somehow that this was the truth, that all white people are racist, are oppressors, are exploiters, and all people of color, by definition, are the exploited, the oppressed, the victims. And by virtue of their victimhood, they acquire a certain virtue. Now, that's the fundamental belief system that undergirds and informs DEI. It sounds very bizarre, and it is. Most people have no idea that this is what is actually happening on the campuses. In my book, DEI Exposed, I don't merely say this. I allow the DEI officers, the diversity officers, the functionaries, the ancillary support staff, they all speak for themselves. They say what they mean. There's no dots to be connected here. You have the complete picture as laid out by these folks. Now, the only solution to this that was presented to colleges and universities was you are guilty of rampant racism and you are complicit in this racism. And to absolve yourself of guilt, you must establish a large and well-compensated bureaucracy, a DEI bureaucracy on your campus to fix this problem that really does not exist in any meaningful form. The problem, of course, being, as they say, rampant racism on the campuses. Does anyone really believe that? Well, of course not. Of course you don't believe that, because it's not true. Even Randall Kennedy, the black Harvard law professor, said, campuses are probably the least racist places in America. So what you have is you've hired a bureaucracy to solve a problem that doesn't exist, and in the process, they are creating that problem that they are tasked with to solve. That problem is never going to end as long as DEI personnel are on the campus conducting trainings, attacking students, attacking faculty and staff with this bizarre ideology. It's really a terrible thing, but I would say that we're on the right track in expunging this from the college campuses.
And how are we doing that? I mean, because I think back to when I was in college, late 80s, early 90s,
Right.
My university had at the time, if not the highest, but one of the highest percentages of professors who admitted to being conservative or right-leaning. That was late 80s, early 90s. And that number now is in the low single digits. Mm-hmm. So how are, and other campuses, I'm sure, are like that, unless you're going to a truly conservative university or religious university. So I love your positivity, but how are campuses getting rid of DEI and getting the pendulum swinging in the right direction? Or as the communists like to say, being on that arc of history?
We had a conversation before that, we're delighted. I'm delighted that the arc of history is bending in our direction. Let me address the disparity you mentioned on the campuses. Right now, the disparity of liberals to conservatives on the campuses is about 6-1. That's according to Sam Abrams' scholarship. He's a professor at Sarah Lawrence College. The gap between liberals and conservatives with regard to staff and administration is 12-1. So being conservative or even mainstream is a lonely task on most college campuses. So your question is, how are we going to expunge this cancer? How are we going to cut out this cancer that's metastasized on our campuses for the last 5 years? Well, really, the only way to do it is the way that it's being done right now by the President of the United States with his executive orders, 3 of them, which one eliminated or expunged DEI, outlawed it in government. The second one outlawed it in publicly funded universities. And the third called upon universities to protect their students against this raft of anti-Semitism that has exploded on the campuses over the last year. He also, his Department of Education, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, issued what is called a Dear Colleague letter. Now, that's what it's called, a Dear Colleague letter, in which it instructed universities and colleges and K through 12 to eliminate, expunge, remove any DEI programs or programs that discriminate upon race, creed, color, ethnicity, and to eliminate them. And you have 14 days to do that. Well, that 14-day deadline came and went on February 28th. So what's going to happen? Is it just a line in the sand like Barack Obama's? You just erase it and step back and draw another line in the sand? No, this has teeth, and the teeth are this. If you don't eliminate your DEI programs that really support illegal discrimination, illegal racial discrimination, and removes protections, equal protection clause from the Constitution, protections for your students, faculty, and staff. If you don't do that, you will lose your federal funding. It's as simple as that. You'll lose all federal grants. You'll lose, and you have students that attend your school on federal funding. This makes you liable. Now, if you want to go ahead and pursue DEI, you go right ahead. You can do it on your own dime. But the federal government will not support and will not fund racial discrimination, illegal racial discrimination. That's the core of the issue. And this is ongoing right now, meaning They just had the deadline on last Friday. They've had less than a week to comply with this, and a lot of schools already have done so. The Ohio State University, which has an immense, had an immense DEI bureaucracy, has withdrawn that. They've eliminated it. They've closed it down. University of Cincinnati has closed down its DEI. Other institutions are moving less robustly, but still moving in that direction, because they are concerned about losing their federal funding. Now, they don't really want to, they could take it to court, of course, and have it tied up in court, but no one wants to be involved in a lawsuit or a court case brought by the Office of Civil Rights as a result of an investigation that says you are discriminating illegally on the basis of race. Who wants that? Who wants to deal with the public relations disaster? And then you might lose the case, which means you lose all your federal funding. So that's where we sit and stand right now with regard to DEI on the campuses. Again, I'm optimistic. I'm elated. It's been a long time coming for conservatives, for mainstream liberals to have something to cheer about in higher education. And what's wonderful about this is this is moving about 10 times faster than we would expect it otherwise too, thanks to the quick stepping of this administration's decisive actions.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been interesting to see how many people that say this is a core belief of theirs. It's all about just their morality and what they believe in, and immediately change course when the federal funding runs out. But anyway, that said, so obviously you've been working on this book for a while. But this election, which obviously has completely shifted the fortunes of DEI, was only about 4 months old, even though it feels a lot longer ago. So how did that circumstance affect the book? Did you have to make some changes?
Well, I have to say that the book has been in the works for about a year. Just a very fortuitous occasion that my book came out this week as the deadline for the universities to comply with federal law came into effect. So I'd like to say I timed it that way, but I in a way I did, because my publisher agreed to accelerate the book. I included a lot of material, including material from this January, all the way through the month of January, which includes the president's 3 crucial executive orders, which are absolutely decisive in striking down this cancer, cutting out the cancer, I should say, of DEI. So I've been working with this. This is an extension. It's not Son of Brutal Minds. This is an extension of Brutal Minds, in that the cancer is emanating from the very same place that the cancer I described in Brutal Minds, which is there's a cadre of people who are basically attacking the belief systems of our young students on college campuses and imposing a different belief system, one that is based on critical consciousness and that of a crypto Maoist by the name of Paulo Freire, who was a Marxist, and which is why on my book behind me you see the hammer and sickle on a ball with a cap and gown, with a cap on top, a mortarboard, which indicates that that Marxism, in all its forms, all its permutations, is still a significant presence on the campus.
Well, I very quickly want to get back to what you said before. Just quickly, something positive to say about Ohio State on this show. We tend not to do that a whole lot. So for all of my friends and former neighbors and family members who are Buckeyes, kudos on the change of heart there in Columbus. So
Ohio State was very smart. I think it's very smart. They can't change the name of this thing and expect to fly under the radar that way, because the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice, they're looking for that. They're looking for this type of subterfuge. And if they find that, believe me, this is going to be run very, very badly for the school that tries it. So I think Ohio State is just wiping the slate clean, saying, look, we're going to, we don't have the problems with these other schools that are going to try to keep their DEI programs using, basically making bad, imprudent decisions on this. We're wiping the slate clean, and we're going to basically admit people on merit and move forward quickly.
I love it. And again, folks, positive things to say about Ohio State. A+ on that one. Good job, guys. Way to get the ball going in the right direction. And you mentioned a little bit ago, Stan, in regards to critical thought, which unfortunately, I see it as a substitute teacher now, and I've been seeing it with kids, in recent years. Critical thought seems to be going the way of the dodo, unfortunately, which is making things easier on college campuses to just indoctrinate.
Yeah.
So as part of this DEI being exposed and being expunged, how do you see critical thought fitting back into, as it should, on college campuses?
Yeah, the idea of critical thinking and basically looking at a problem, looking at from the Enlightenment perspective of a skeptical eye and asking logical questions, probing, finding out, is this true? Is this partially true? Is this false? That's all part of the marketplace of ideas that we've always talked about, but really have not lived and breathed for quite some time on the college campus. What's replaced that? What has replaced that is a view that there is a received truth. And when you come to the college campus, we're going to indoctrinate you, I should say, usher you in to the world of the folks who know. Thomas Sowell called this the group, the anointed. And this is the group that believes in critical consciousness. Now, I use the word critical. It's different than what you and I were talking about a moment ago. Critical consciousness is a phrase. It comes from the Portuguese called consciência social. Portuguese as it's spoken in Brazil. And the guy who coined this is a guy by the name of Paulo Freire, who dominates the education theory in education schools. And he was a follower of Mao Zedong, education policy, education theory. He was a fan of Vladimir Lenin. He was a fan of Joseph Stalin. He was a fan, very much so, of Mao Zedong, and greatly admired the cultural revolution that Mao was conducting, and wrote about this and endorsed the cultural revolution even as its horrors were being made known. And so this is the source of much of this nonsense of DEI. Paulo Freire is revered amongst DEI people. He is revered amongst the educationists coming out of education schools. And most people aren't aware that this guy was a crypto-Maoist. It's almost like it's a mask or a proxy for Karl Marx. You know, he's an older guy, he's got a beard, he's long gone now. And he wrote his very famous book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed in 1970, which is the third most cited book in education theory in the world. The third most cited book. I think it's all of social science. So he's had great influence. And it's an influence that we can only lament. But the best thing we can do is to make this known that this is what's going on. Now, you mentioned critical thinking, of course. Now, what's replaced the critical thinking is the idea that when you come into college, whether you're a graduate student or an undergraduate, we're going to admit you into this club of those who know. You will now have critical consciousness, which will replace your false consciousness. This is the dichotomy that we first saw with Karl Marx. He used the term class consciousness, as opposed to false consciousness. Now, I have to be honest and say that, Karl Marx never used the term false consciousness in the Capital. Okay, this is a term that came along afterwards to emphasize what it means by class consciousness or critical consciousness. Critical consciousness means that you have ascended to a level or a plane of knowing where you can peer into the contradictions of power and privilege of society. This is a gaze that is unavailable to your parents who have false consciousness. Now, it's all a scam, of course. I mean, there's nothing new and fresh and different about this, but it is new, fresh, and different about to undergraduates and certainly graduate students who feel very privileged to now be part of the priesthood, who believe in, who uses arcane vocabulary, transgressing boundaries, interrogating subject matter, that kind of thing. It's all very heady, intoxicating type stuff. And if you're an undergraduate who is looking for a reason to dislike your parents, this is the perfect thing to do. You embrace this kind of critical consciousness that is, you've ascended above the plane of consciousness of your parents, your friends, and certainly places like your church, your social groups, that kind of thing. Certainly those founders of the American ideal. This is heady stuff. So that has replaced the notion of critical thinking. You don't need to do any critical thinking because that's already been done for you. All that's left for you to do is to embrace this new truth.
And regurgitate it when you go back home at Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yes. That's why everyone's so angry at Thanksgiving.
There it is.
Well, that's why they get angry when you have you see the Turning Point USA videos or Young America's Foundation videos where someone will come on campus and challenge what these students are being taught. That's when they start to get angry. And it reveals the fact that they're not really being taught to think critically about any of these things, because that's the first time this is actually being challenged, and that's when they get angry.
This stuff has all been debunked. This is what's funny. What they're being taught has already been debunked. Now, whether you believe the debunking or not is another matter altogether. But at the very least, you should say, okay, well, here's critical theory. Here is this DEI doctrine. Here's critical race theory. And here are what critics have said about this. And you can make your own choice, but they don't do that, which is why I think Charlie Kirk in those great videos that I enjoy as well, when he's sitting there and these people are coming to the mic and they're uttering these platitudes. They're stale platitudes, but they think they're fresh. They don't think they're cliches. These students believe they're uttering something fresh, new, and different. This is marvelous. And it's boilerplate that's been said before by better people than them and been debunked by even better people than them. And when Charlie Kirk comes back with this, and this, it just befuddles them. And they get angry and they walk away because they don't know how to respond to it.
Stomp your hands, clap your feet. And Jim, you are the author behind so many great columns back at our old Fredonia site, and also, and you continue to do it in our little mail group, talking about kids on campus, and just and of course, I'm blanking on it. You co-opted the Who, and the kids are all right. Yeah, your kids are all right. Series. Talk to us about that and how you've recently revealed that the campuses are swinging in the right direction.
Yeah. So apologize in the background, by the way. That's
sunlight in the Northwest. Wait a minute.
No, that's the cat back there. That's the Dread Pirate Wesley back there trying to get out.
There
the
we
door.
go. Nice.
But anyway,
way out.
But yeah. So I wrote a series of articles on the site, and basically, what I was trying to communicate was that if you look at the actual polling, it shows that millennials, Gen Z, they're significantly more conservative as a group than boomers and Gen X are, and so it kind of shows that there is a limit or a ceiling to how well this propaganda works on younger generations. And it works up to a point, obviously, but at some point, these young folks come smack into reality, and the theory just doesn't hold up, and so the polling is showing that. So I mean, are you seeing that there is kind of statistically there's kind of a limit to how well this propaganda is working on these kids?
I think that the success of the propaganda is a function of how good the propagandists are. And these propagandists are really declining in quality. I'll say that there's the folks who are in the classroom, who are the professors, the ne'er-do-wells of my colleagues who use their classrooms as a bully pulpit for their own political opinions. And I'm referring to English professors and sociology professors who shouldn't be doing anything of the sort. I'm a Weberian, Max Weber aficionado, and my classrooms are politically neutral as much as they can be. I teach material that I'm supposed to teach. The students are paying a pretty penny to the information and expertise to receive, not the thoughts of the day from Professor Ridgley that I read in the newspaper and my reactions to it. I think that what you're seeing, Jim, and I agree with 100% that the pendulum is swinging in this younger generation, and that's because the BS, the balderdash, the humbug that's being propounded by the very mediocre people on the college campuses is being punctured. Is being punctured by social media. It's being punctured by people who have been, as I think the term is, red-pilled. And I think that when you put a student's, very bright person's, critical thinking cap on, and they say, well, I'm here to think and to learn and to explore these ideas, and you're trying to tell me that there's a received truth, and I'm not seeing it or hearing, I'm not believing. What I'm hearing from you, DEI people, is that there's a constructed world that's make-believe. And in this make-believe world, all whites are racist, all persons of color are oppressed, and that America is a racist country that is not a land of opportunities, not a land of the American dream, that there's a white supremacy culture that dominates everything. But this is what you're saying the world is all about, but my personal experience doesn't comport with that. It just doesn't comport. I'm looking around, and you're telling me to disbelieve my senses, The reception, the messages, the experience that I'm living right now simply doesn't agree with that. And this disconfirms your theory. And what we have here is the struggle of these con artists trying to get people to believe this theory. It's really ramshackle and is filled with lots of contradictions. And the experience of young people say, you know what, I'm all for the American dream. I'm all for the optimistic view of capitalism. I can make my world better than my parents' world and make a great world for my kids. And capitalism is the way to go. Free market economics is the way to go. Economic freedom, social freedom, political freedom, that's the way to go. Not this cramped nonsense, racialization of society and looking at things through a lens of racialism. So, that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I agree with you, Jim.
Well, true liberalism can maybe make a return to campuses. True.
Okay.
And you mentioned earlier the grifters, the hustlers, and you wrote recently about, and apologies on the mispronunciation of the name, but Ibram Kendi.
Ibram Kendi.
So there's one of the hustlers who is just shifting from university to university, doing the shuffle. What can we do to prevent that?
Well, I'd like to encourage them to keep moving. Okay, he began his career at, I think, an American university, and he was a graduate student at Temple when I was at Temple teaching there. And he began got some donations, started his anti-racism center at American University. He was recruited to Boston University, Boston College, or Boston University, and set up shop there with a $10 million donation from Twitter at the time. And he mismanaged the center. There's a lot of backbiting and malfeasance, financial shenanigans, and he just left. He just was basically resigned and moved on. His center is closed, and he's moved on to Howard University. So he's a journeyman. And basically his scam is this. He's the guy who wrote the book, 2019 book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And his view or his perspective is what I've just been talking about, the con game. There's only two groups of people. There are racists and there are anti-racist. And you fall into one of the two categories. There are oppressors and oppressed, exploiters and exploited. There's evil and good. There are villains and victims. And this idea that everyone in America falls into one of those two categories is very primitive ideology. That comes from the cleric Mani back 2,000 years ago. And he's the one who named, or the name Manichaeism, or good and evil, light and dark, came from this dichotomy that there's only two forces in the world. There's only two places to be: the forces of light and the forces of dark, forces of good and the forces of evil, the forces of anti-racism, the forces of racism. St. Augustine was a follower of Mani, and he basically repudiated. He wrote a very famous tract on why he repudiated that whole idea of this bifurcated system. So what we find from Ibram Kendi is a very primitive system. A very primitive system that we've rejected numerous times in the history of the university, and here he is rolling it out again and getting people to buy into it. And buy into it they did. He was selling his time for something like $20,000 a speech. Even a phone call with the guy was hundreds of dollars a minute. He wrote several. His bestseller, of course, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is sold over 1 million copies. He's a millionaire several times over, from what I understand it. And he did this by selling the big con. And I don't know if he's to be admired or to be reviled. After all, he simply gave people what they were looking for. And these were a lot of guilt-ridden white liberals and a lot of persons of color looking for some sort of explanation, some sort of externalization of their problems to explain their lot in life. And that's a lot of what this is all about, explaining someone's bad lot in life.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing that's happened since Orange Man Bad is back in the White House, some of my favorite bands who are, for better or worse, made up of what you just described with the guilt-ridden white leftists, are jumping on the Luigi Mangione bandwagon, which is something that you address in the book. And can we ever get rid of that, or is that just going to be one of those byproducts of this Marxist thought that has been indoctrinated into schools for so long?
Well, Luigi Mangione is an interesting case. He does appear in the introduction to the book. He appears several times in the book because he's the archetypical case of the person who's on the left who goes too far. He's not an aberration. There are dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds.
But here's what I don't like is these bands that I like, and they're actually encouraging. They want people to go out. They're going to give free tickets, free concert tickets for life for someone who goes and does something similar to that. I mean, obviously, these are bands I'm no longer going to listen to or no longer going to go see live. But it's anarchy, and I just how do we get that out?
This is not unexpected because when I was a military intelligence officer in Germany, we studied the terrorists of the time, different than the kinds of terrorists we have now, the Red Brigades and the Baader-Meinhof gang. These were not people who were driven to terrorism by poverty or anything like that. These were upper middle class kids. When I say kids, I'm referring to college-age students, kind of like the Weather Underground in the United States back in the 60s and early 70s. These were people. Barbara Meyer was one of the Baader-Meinhof gang. These are people who are well off, disaffected liberals, impassioned zealots, followers of the idea of Marxian revolution, and trying to make that revolution come to pass. And by taking action against other people, based not on the fact that they might, that they know these people or they know anything at all about the situation, but based on what their theory and doctrine has told them to do. And that's what Luigi Mangione did. He's a modern day terrorist, the same kind of person who was a member of the Baader-Meinhof gang, the Red Brigades, back in the 80s. And this idea is that you go over to the other side where you no longer believe the evidence from your senses, from your five senses. You no longer believe the evidence from your personal experience. Instead, you substitute this theory for how you believe the world works, rather than your experience is how the world works. This is what I mean by critical consciousness, that you can peer into the contradictions of society, which is what Luigi Mangione was saying he was doing. I'm in a war against capitalism. I'm striking a blow of anti-capitalism. I'm taking down one of the usurper classes. I'm taking down one of the exploiters. I didn't know this guy, Brian Thompson. He shot him in the back. Shot a man in the back who has a wife and kids, and whose company is basically paying for the health care of a lot of people, making sure that people were getting the health care that they need. So this was Luigi Mangione. That's the explanation that we got in his manifesto. He is the archetypical person on the left who takes it to the final step. He's going to act in revolutionary ways, killing people, because that's what his theory tells him to do. And that's what I think these DEI people are all about. They're just a couple of steps away from being the next Luigi Mangione. As you mentioned, there are popular influencers that are advocating this sort of thing. I mean, these folks were beating the drum, praise for this guy, calling him the hot assassin. Professor over at University of Pennsylvania was saying, "Oh, this is wonderful. He deserves a place of honor. A day to celebrate." And the fact is that she was so far out of line, she had to apologize. Do I believe the apology? No, I do not. This is what these people believe, and I do believe that Luigi Mangione probably picked it up across the street over at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty disturbing indication of how divided and tribalistic our society is becoming, that people are actually cheering on assassinations. That used to be a kind of a red line that you wouldn't cross no matter how extreme your beliefs were, but people have just kind of stepped over that, with the attempted Trump assassination, with the Luigi Mangione. And whenever I see people celebrating Luigi Mangione, I always challenge them, saying, how has your life gotten any better from this CEO being assassinated? How has it gotten better in any way? And all they can say is, well, now more rich people are scared. And I'm thinking, well, how does that make anybody's life better? It
increases your rates, because these CEOs have got to get more. They need to hire security details.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're convinced that you're in a culture war, then then you treat it like an actual war. Then you treat that like it's a win. But it's so beyond the pale of how we're supposed to behave in a civilized society. It's really disturbing to me.
Well, this is where we find that they want to transform our society into something that is different, something that is, to their mind, utopian, but in actuality is dystopian. I think that George Orwell was I know you guys are great fans of George Orwell and the dystopian future that he predicted in 1984. And that book, based on his experiences with the Soviet Union, really exemplifies to a large extent what we're facing now, including and especially the use of language and his notion of newspeak. The left has always been very cognizant of how important it is to seize the language so that you can redefine words so that the words themselves contain your argument. Like, for instance, the idea of racism. You and I have different, probably have a different view of racism than the folks on the left who have defined racism, redefined it as prejudice plus power. And with this definition, which has been around since the early 1970s, with this new definition, this means that persons of color cannot be racist by definition. Now, you and I, we begin to use the same language, racism. When you're talking with a person of the left, they mean something completely different. They mean something that only applies to white folk, okay? And they have their own reasons why this is so. And when you come back with the term, well, that's racist when you're talking about behavior that has been exemplified by the Nation of Islam, something like that, the Black Muslims. Well, you say that has no impact on them because they simply don't agree with your definition of the word. And that there's a subtle and under the radar language battle going on that I try to surface in my book, DEI Exposed. At the end of the book, there is a glossary of many, many terms that are used by the left, used by DEI functionaries, and I explain what those terms actually mean to try to get through this morass of redefined words that don't really mean what you think they mean.
And I almost should have titled this. This should have been another Jim. This should have been a Feet to the Fire episode because Stan is such a you're a great guy of exposing and detailing and putting critical thought into what's going on our campuses and needs to be expunged and is being expunged. But this what you're just talking about with redefining language, they've taken three words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Three very great words. I believe in all that. I mean, our mission statement here on All Over the Place is the things that bring us together, not the things that separate us. And they've turned these you put those three words together as DEI, and all of a sudden it's a victim-minded virtue signal fest, and it's sad. But going off campus briefly, but tied to it, since Marty's not here, but he is our resident NFL expert. But I want to get your thoughts on how or do you see it happening with the Rooney Rule in the NFL, where you have to, it's mandatory now, where you have to interview people of color or of a minority status before you hire anyone to be your coach.
Well, that rule's been around for a long time, as I understand it. I just find it very humorous to me, and I don't really dwell upon it, to look at the NFL, which is one of the most merit-based organizations in the world, in terms of you bring someone into your organization because they can perform, and yet here we have this rule for head coaches that says, well, we're going to make sure that we do this so we have some sort of equitable balance in the hiring process. And when I see no such process being used to any effect at all in the actual drafting of players, it's purely merit based, and so that's what I think about the Rooney Rule, the so-called Rooney Rule. I think that we have a very selective DEI application here in certain the dissonance there for me. The dissonance is obvious. The cognitive dissonance is obvious. You've got this group of people who are the most talented athletes in the world, and other sports as well. And then you've got this, well, we don't have enough of the right matrix plugged in with the ethnicity. So in the coaches, so we're going to have to apply this matrix here. What is the comparison here? What are you comparing? What's your base group that you're comparing it against? Because you're obviously not utilizing this base group for comparison by looking at the general population. You're obviously not doing that. And the military is another group that does not do this. I think you look at the military and non-commissioned officers, sergeants and that sort of thing, NCOs, 30% are Black Americans. And this is the only democratized organization in America where significant numbers of young white kids are going to go into an organization where routinely their boss is going to be an African American. And it was my situation with the military, and it was fine. There was no question because the democratization of basic training will do that to you. Everyone is treated the same. Everyone is held to the same standards. That's changing a little bit here with regard to gender, but everyone is held to the same standard. And there's a great bonding that happens within the crew, within the platoons, within the teams because of this. And I think that the officer corps is also reflects more so than most other corporations in America, the actual racial makeup of society at large. No one looks at the military to find out, well, how did you do that? How did you go about doing that? Was DEI a part of that? Well, of course it wasn't. It was merit-based. It was completely merit-based. It was based on who are patriots, who are moved to defend the country, who believe in our ideals, who are willing to take the oath, and willing to lay down their lives for their country, for their compatriots. Those are the principles that the left absolutely hates. They hate those principles.
Yeah. The undelicious irony that an organization that, like I said, 30% does show based on content of character and patriotism.
Yep.
And yet it's an organization that the left routinely loves to put down.
Yeah.
And you only send stupid people there, or yeah. Like
when it's convenient, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we want to support our troops." When it's convenient, but most of the time it is exactly as you say, that they don't like the military at all.
Well, much like that. I mean, it's kind of, and with DEI being exposed and being expunged, and through with the president, it's nice to see that content of character, not the color of skin or race or religion or whatever it may be, however you want to divide, that's being pushed aside. Because I was raised, like so many people in the 70s, by parents who were disciples of the recently assassinated Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr. And the pendulum, unfortunately, got pushed the wrong direction by people in this century who wanted to make it about the color of your skin. So it's good to see that happening. But with the president, moving swiftly, like you mentioned earlier, through executive orders, what can we do to make this more permanent? And so that, say, someone that comes in down the line, and they just erase it with that stroke of a pen and a phone.
Well, we're going to see this play out in court. There's no doubt about it. The executive orders are subject to lawsuits, about 70 lawsuits right now, by folks who see the gravy train. They're being pulled away from the teat of government. They're being pulled away from the teat of public funding, and they don't like it. They don't like it because it's their livelihoods we're talking about. They're lavishly funded sinecures are being talked about. So yes, they're going to battle tooth and nail to stay on that gravy train, and it's going to be played out in court. And I think there's going to be a lot of litigation. The lawyers are going to make a lot of money off this. It's going to go on for several years, but I think that the weight of the law is on the side of justice. That arc of history is going to continue bending our direction. So the legal battles will be won one at a time. Precedents will be set. It will go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will rule accordingly, will rule according to what the law actually says. The laws being, of course, the Civil Rights Act, 1964-65, that you cannot discriminate against race on the basis of race, and the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution, 14th Amendment. You cannot violate that with impunity, even though our schools have been doing so with impunity for some time. Right now is a sea change challenging this. The longevity of it, that depends on whether the people who are involved can be expunged from the campus. Now, that may sound harsh on my part, but I've dealt with this type of person for so many years to understand that there are, policy is people, or people is policy, I should say, that you can change the policy all you like. But if the people who are true believers who are enacting this policy, they'll just give it another name, they'll move over to another office, and they'll rekindle that program under another name. This has been addressed in the executive orders and letters by President Trump's Justice Department. Say, no, you can't rename your program and have it and then rekindle it under a different name. No, you can't do that, and we'll be looking for that. And if you do that, well, we're going to double the penalty against you, that kind of thing. So you got to get rid of the people. That, as I say, that sounds like, no, I'm not backing off of that at all. These people need to get off the campus. If what I say is true in both my book, Brutal Minds, and in DEI Exposed, if what I say is true, and it is because they're the ones saying it, then their abuse of students, their abuse of faculty, their malfeasance and misuse of funds, They're basically this hate-filled doctrine that they're propounding on the campus. All of that qualifies them from having contact with our best and brightest youth.
One final question I want to give to you, Stan. Going back to what you talked about earlier with the numbers on campus, 6-1.
Yep.
With faculty, and academia has traditionally been a leftist, a field for leftist thought. But do you think, with the pendulum swinging the way it is right now, there's a way to encourage conservative-minded thinkers to get into professorships and get onto campuses and start molding minds in a truly liberal education?
Yeah, Irving Janis was a psychologist, I think in the 1960s, who coined the term groupthink. He did a wonderful book called The Victims of Groupthink. And the idea that if you get a cadre of people who all believe the same things, more or less, and they discuss with each other and they exchange opinions with each other, their belief systems become more and more alike and become codified in kind of an orthodoxy. And they become mind guards. Mind guards are self-appointed people to ensure that there are no dissidents. Dissidents are excluded from the group, may be eliminated. And this is what we have in most departments, academic departments like the liberal arts, social sciences, political science, sociology, perhaps history. I would be so far as to say history's been affected by this in the sense that you get this orthodoxy. One of my colleagues said, as part of it, they have a conversation going, and unless you can show that your work, brings you into that conversation of already accepted beliefs, then you won't be included. And this is what has excluded conservatives and just mainstream liberals from academia for quite some time. They're not part of the conversation. They're not part of the people using this lingo, this newly anointed lingo of new research directions that are basically the same research direction that everyone is using. It's very easy to become comfortable with your colleagues in that way because you all believe the same things at root, and it's very uncomfortable for them to entertain the idea of say a slightly right-leaning professor to come in who's a historian, who's an English professor, who is a sociologist, who's going to challenge them on their fundamental beliefs that should be challenged, because many times they're grounded on really flimsy foundation. And having someone there who's always going to say, well, you know what, maybe we ought to look at it this way. They're not going to like that. And so that's the major stumbling block. What's going to open up the academy is some sort of, I would say it's going to have to be legal action, because I think that universities have abdicated their responsibility with self-governance. They're not governing themselves. They're not providing adequate oversight. The boards of trustees, sleepy boards of trustees, are not providing oversight. The government's going to have to enact something that says, you know what, you don't have any diversity of thought at your university. You've got 94 professors who are Democrats, you've got 6 who are Republicans, and you've got 1 independent. There's no diversity of thought there. Whatever you think that those numbers mean, whatever you think they mean, it indicates that there is a groupthink at work on that campus in that particular department. And until we can break that, until we can establish some sort of affirmative action, if you're going to go that route, or diversity of thought, and you don't really have to call it diversity, affirmative action, you go as a marketplace of ideas. The idea that certain ideas are not going to be excluded from discussion on the campus, from discussion in our department. And that is going to be a tough nut to crack, because faculty don't like to be told what to do. Certainly not by some numbskull state legislator, right? I use that, I'm not, of course, don't mean that literally, but that's how they view it.
You're in Pennsylvania. You can say that about the upper government there. I got no beef with that. But well, Jim, do you have anything else for Professor Ridgley?
Yeah, just kind of playing the devil's advocate here. So I think the argument against a lot of this, the criticism of this, would basically be saying, well, we're not really pushing propaganda. What we're doing is we're just offering an alternative thought to all of the quote unquote right-wing propaganda that's been pushed, for so many years in academia. And that's, certainly the professors I had in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was how they framed a lot of what they pushed on us. was, well, we're teaching the secret knowledge that the establishment doesn't want you to know. That's how they kind of push that. So, if someone made that argument against your book or your arguments and said, well, we're just telling the truth that, that the establishment didn't want you to know in the past, what would your response to that be?
Well, of course, you point me in the direction where all of these right-wing views are being propounded on the campus. I haven't found any in my entire time, more than 20 years on the campus. Where is this happening? The only place it could happen is from the office of a person like myself who doesn't do that. And the idea that we're offering an alternative to the right-wing propaganda. Well, there's no right-wing propaganda on the campus, none to speak of. But I will say that the right wing is now being held down by people who used to be called liberals, used to be called traditional liberals, people who view us as a marketplace of ideas and look at both sides of an argument, the third or fourth side of an argument. Those people are now the right wing. Those people are, and they keep their mouths shut, I should say, because no one wants any kind of trouble. So that argument would be, propaganda here and propaganda there. Unfortunately, it's like arms control, the old arms control cartoon, where it says, you got over here where you've got like two little cannons, and over here you've got a country with 30 cannons, and the country with 30 cannons says, look, we'll give up our cannon, we'll give up 2 cannons if you give up your 2 cannons. That's the dynamic. It's as we like to say in poli-science, it's asymmetrical. Okay, there's an asymmetrical argument going on there. There's opinions on the right and opinions on the left, and the opinions on the right are nowhere to be found. Quite literally, nowhere to be found on the college campus. And I think that the left opinions are amplified by the fact you've got people who have no clue what they're talking about politics in classrooms where they're supposed to be teaching English composition or teaching sociology or teaching history or teaching literary, Shakespeare. Instead of teaching Shakespeare, they're deconstructing Shakespeare and trying to find the implications of race, class, and gender in Shakespearean plays. And the idea that Shakespeare is just, your work is just as good as Shakespeare, because after all, in a relativistic world, who can say whose work is better than someone else's work?
Moral relativism.
Yeah.
That's my professional response to that. Yes. Well, Professor Ridgley, Stan's been an absolute pleasure. You're a strategic thinker. You're a critical thinker. You're an exposer of DEI. And I forgot to mention in your intro, you're also a Russian linguist. I forgot to put on my
shapka. Shapka.
Put on my little shanka here, da. And all I keep is the accent from my semesters at Penn State University.
Хорошо, отлично.
Как дела сегодня?
Очень хорошо, очень отлично, безусловно.
Неплохо.
Yeah. So, спасибо большое. The only practice I get is from my Russian students, and we do have quite a few of them here on campus. They hear me speaking. Oh, what is that? No, they don't. No. I'm not as fluent as I used to be back when I was actually doing business over there. You don't use it, you lose it.
All I remember, like I said, I kept the accent, and это красивая девушка. If there's a pretty lady in the room,
Симпатичная девушка.
It flows off tongue. They tend to be impressed. But Professor Stan Ridgley, thank you so much for joining us here on All Over the Place, folks. I've been sending it across the ticker. I'm going to put it across the ticker right now. And for those of you who are listening only, not watching on YouTube, we love you. We love your listens and shares and everything as well. But you can check out Stan's books at brutalminds.com. Also, make sure you're going over to X and LinkedIn. You can also read his stuff over at American Greatness or at The Great Courses and get a lot of great stuff from this incredibly awesome strategic thinker and critical thinker. Again, Stan Ridgley, thanks for joining us here on All Over the Place. It's been our pleasure.
My pleasure. Pleasure's all mine talking with you guys. It's fantastic. Thanks a lot, guys.
And send your students in Pennsylvania to Drexel, not across the street at Penn. I said it. All right. Take care, everyone. We'll be back real soon on All Over the Place.
Bye-bye.
All Over the Place, where the fun sanity never ends.